Okay. Thanks everybody for attending this hybrid meeting for the ONS Task Group Select Move. Councillor June Molyneux, Chair of the Committee, Councillor Sarah Ainsworth, Vice Chair. It's been live streamed on YouTube. Members in the chamber, when you want to speak, please raise your hand to indicate to me that you want to speak. And when invited to speak, please turn your microphone on, but turn it off when you've finished speaking. If you're joining via Teams, use the raise hand function if you wish to speak, and I'll hope to see you. If the technology fails, I'll adjourn the meeting for a few minutes. We'll try and resolve the issue, and if it's not possible, a new date and time will be organised. Can everybody ensure their phones are turned to silent? And we're not expecting a fire drill, so if the alarm sounds, it's real. Get out, basically. Apologies.
I've received no apologies from members, although Councillor Matthew Lynch is unable to attend this evening for his item.
Okay. Thanks for that. Minutes of the meeting, Tuesday the 15th of March. Pages 3 to 6. Well, somebody, any issues to move from that? Thank you. Thanks, Zena. Okay, that's okay. Everybody happy with that? Okay, so they're approved. Declarations of interest. Members are reminded of their responsibility to declare any pecuniary interest in respect of matters contained in the agenda. If you have an interest, you must withdraw from the meeting. So, does anybody have any declarations of interest? If not, no. So item 3, Councillor Lynch can't come to discuss those things. Can we please, if he can't come to the next meeting, can we ask him to supply something written with his comments, what issues he sees with Select Move? Because that would help. If he'd done that, we could have moved it on tonight. Okay. Item 4 is discussion with Andy Gale, the allocation policy review consultant, who we can't see but we can hear. So
thank you very much.
So we'll just have to imagine what you look like. Welcome, Andy. Thanks for taking the time to join us this evening to talk about the updated and reviewed allocations policy. Now, I've had sent out to us today, I'm sorry it was late, I would have liked it to have come to you sooner, the letting scheme, the allocations policy from 2018. So everything's in there, if members have had a chance to look at it. So what's the best way, Andy? Do you want to go through it paragraph by paragraph, or?
I think you'd lose the will to live, Chair, if we went through paragraph by paragraph.
Well, I meant section by section, I suppose. I mean, but
what I was going to do, Chair, with your permission, is just to talk a little bit about. Obviously, I know members in the past have been I've been told, have been a little bit frustrated about some of the things they might want to do on Select Moves. So I wanted to talk very briefly about, how allocations policies work, and then look at some of the areas that officers are discussing. And I'm a consultant, just to say, everybody, I've been asked to come in and support the review of the Select Move policy. Mm-hmm. So I do lots of allocations policies around the country. And officers have been discussing some of the possible changes, and I just wanted to introduce some of those to you, so that it opened up a discussion, shall we say, some of the areas where you might want to see changes, and just get an idea of some of the things officers are discussing at the moment that they want to bring to members. Does that sound okay as a way forward?
If everybody else is okay with that, yeah.
Okay then. And so what I'm going to do is just talk to you a little bit about how allocations policies work. So every council has to have an allocations policy, so it's a legal requirement, and that doesn't matter whether the council, as you have done in Chorley, transferred their stock to a housing association. There still has to be an allocations policy, and that policy then dictates who gets housed, basically. So who can join the register, who gets housed, and by housed for you, that means nominated to a housing association under the Select Move policy itself. So That's what you've got. You've got a legal allocations policy. It was last reviewed in 2000, I think 2018 was the last time there was some minor changes to it. And now is the time where, you may want to consider some changes to that policy. So just sort of setting the scene. So, it's interesting. There's always more people on the housing register, on the select move register for Chorley than there are let-ins. So if we look at the current position, the figures I've got are 2,189 households on the housing register in Chorley itself. And that would consist of both families and single people. So it's not 200,189 people, it's 200,189 households. So some of those would be single and some of those would be family. And how many do you house a year? Well, in the last financial year, so just ending 31st of March, you housed 1,072. So 2,189 wanting housing, and last year you housed 1,072. And that actually isn't a bad housing position. So I deal with a lot of councils where there are 6 to 8 times the number on the housing register than get housed. And that's not quite the same for yourselves. So that's a healthier position than many other councils are actually in, but it still means that only half the people on the register can get housed, and obviously lots of people join the register and leave the register. So it's not the same 2,189 all the time. So you've got this 5-band scheme at the moment, A to E. And that works on the basis of descending order. So people with the highest need, obviously a very urgent need, go into band A. And then obviously with an urgent need, band B, and then so on down to band E. So that's what you've got, 5 bands making up those 2,189 households. And that's quite complicated to have 5 bands. Most councils, I suppose, would have a 3 or a 4-band scheme. Select Move has got a 5-band scheme itself. So what about the rules that the government sets on joining the register? Well, there are some rules you can't do anything about, and there's some rules that you can do something about. So think of the housing register as like an exclusive club in Chorley. Basically, there's a door policy as to who can join the housing register. It's interesting as well that a lot of us, I still use the phrase waiting list, and maybe some members and certainly members of the public use the word waiting list. But it's not a waiting list in law. It hasn't been a waiting list since 1935, actually. It's a register of need. And that's one of the things that really frustrates, I think, people out there, service users, because they see it as a waiting list where you join and you queue, whereas actually it's a register of need. So someone may have been on the housing register for 5 years in, say, a lower band, and someone comes on tomorrow in a higher band and they go above the person that's been on for 5 years. And that obviously is a pretty frustrating thing, but it's been the way that allocations law works. So it's a register of need, relative need, rather than a waiting list itself. So there's some rules that you can't play around with. Those are the rules the government sets on immigration. So obviously, for example, since we left the European Union, anyone who is allowed into the country from the EU and is a worker from the 1st of January 2021 can no longer join the housing register. So there are immigration rules set by central government. And then there are qualification rules that you can set. And that's where it becomes more interesting, really, about all the different rules that you yourselves can set. And you've set some rules at the moment. So you have a rule that people have to have a local connection with the select move area. And that's defined as having lived in the area continuously for 6 months in the last 12 or 3 years in the last 5. You can set a rule on family for local connection purposes, whether that is close family or no family for that matter. And I'll talk a little more about that in a second. And you can set a rule on things like how much people earn. And so, you set a rule based on if the household income is above a certain amount, then you feel that they can afford to rent or buy themselves, so they can't join the housing register. And there's some obvious rules that you can set as a council, and you have set. So if the people are guilty of unacceptable behaviour, and you think that behaviour means they shouldn't be a tenant, then you can set a rule and do set a rule that they don't qualify for select move until they improve that behaviour to your satisfaction. And if people have had former rent arrears, maybe with a housing association landlord, you can set a rule and do set a rule that they can't qualify for the register until they've sorted those rent arrears out. So, you know, you're the same as any other council in that you can set these rules to qualify. And then once somebody actually can get onto the housing register, so if they do qualify, if they do meet these qualification rules, then you ban them. And obviously in the select move policy, you start with band A all the way down to band E. And the higher the housing need, the higher the band. And then what you do is you set quotas. So there's quotas for each band except for band E, but they're not large quotas for some of the lower bands. The higher quotas are for some of the higher need bands. So obviously you'll advertise properties and there'll be a quota. So everybody gets a look in down the bands from A to D. Everybody gets a chance of housing, though people in the higher bands get more chance of housing than people in the lower bands. And in short, that's how your select move policy actually works. You've got the free councils in Self-Gribble, Preston and Chorley. You have the however many 10 housing associations or more, and they then put the properties that are empty that you would have nomination rights to into the select move system, and then people bid for those properties under the choice-based letting system. And that's how the system is, and that's pretty common, as with lots and lots of councils. What I wanted to do then was to just give you some suggestions of some of the things that officers have been discussing as potential changes to the policy. And I'm looking at some of the big picture stuff, in that, you know, in a policy of 50 pages, there will be small minor changes. But what are the big idea changes which are emerging? That's what I'm looking to just to introduce to you at this early stage. Now, you know, obviously none of these changes can go ahead unless members want these changes. And obviously there will be a consultation with members in that you have quite a difficult position that you've got free councils and all these housing associations that will need to agree to any changes. And then once they're agreed by the free councils and the associations, that will then go out for the consultation with service users and stakeholders and others as to whether they agree with the changes. If everybody agrees, or even if they disagree, some of the stakeholders, if you as councillors want to make the changes, then you can make the changes. And then those would be the changes which are brought in for all existing people on the register and any new people that join. So let me just introduce briefly the discussions that officers have been having. And the first one is something I know that members have been concerned about for some time now, which is that the local connection qualifying rule. And it's been reported to me that some members think that it is too generous. And if it's too generous, then people that don't have a longer term connection with Chorley may miss out. And your current local connection policy starts with how long have you lived in Chorley. So someone can get onto the select move register if they've lived in the select move area itself for 6 months in the last 12. That's not a very tight policy in that sense. And most councils follow the government's guidance, which is you shouldn't be able to join the register unless you had lived in the area for at least 2 years. Some councils in London go further than that. Some councils say you can't join unless you've lived in the area for 5 years. And obviously, the longer you set the qualification for residence, the more likely the people that get housed will have some form of connection with Chorley other than 6 months in the last 12. So there's an option there, and what officers are considering as part of the steering group, the Select Move steering group, is putting to members that 6 months in the last 12 should be changed to the government recommended 2 years. So you would have to have been living in Chorley for 2 continuous years, Otherwise, you would not be able to join the housing register. So that's one of the first rules. What I intend to do is just go through what some of the proposed changes potentially could be that members may be interested in, and then go back for some questions one by one at each of these rules. So I'll just cover the rules first, then I'll go back to them and open it up for discussion and comment from members. So you could change it to 2 years from 6 months in the last 12. You could try and change it for more than 2 years. Some councils go for 3 years. London councils go for 5 years. But remember, whatever you change has to get agreement across the Select Move group themselves of all the councils. You also have a local connection that if you don't have residents, you could get a local connection for close family. So if you've got close family living in the area, and there's a slight concern about that in that, you know, quite a lot of people have family that live in many places scattered across the UK. But if you could get a local connection as you can now for having close family living in the Chorley area, then you might be housing people that have, say, a housing problem in Manchester, who, because they've got a mum or a dad that lives in the Chorley area, are allowed to join the Chorley housing register. And the question mark, obviously, is, does that meet your local needs? Somebody whose housing problem is in Manchester or in Liverpool, should they be allowed to join the register and have the same priority that someone that's lived for the last 10 years in Chorley? And I think that's something you might want to consider, whether to tighten that up. So obviously, if there's a need to give or receive essential support and have close family, that might be something that qualifies people, but just on the basis of having a close family member living in Chorley when the applicant doesn't live in Chorley themselves, should that go in there? There's also then, still on local connection, that people are employed in Chorley, and obviously you do want people to be employed and remain in Chorley, but it does mean, you know, many people commute an hour or so away from where they actually work. So should the fact that they work in Chorley alone for over 16 hours a week be enough to qualify for the housing register? Again, you know, you might be taking people onto the housing register in Chorley that don't actually live in Chorley, but get on because they work 16 hours a week in Chorley. And that could be tightened. One of the options might be that it needs to be more than an hour's commute away before somebody would be able to qualify on that basis. So those are some of your options on local connection. I'll come back to that whole area because I'm sure as members you'll have some thoughts on that. So what else could you change? So the current policy is to register everyone, whether they've got a housing need or not. So anyone in Chorley can register to join, and they'll get one of these bands. Bands A to E, and there are 50% of the councils in England of whatever political persuasion have scrapped open registers. They've said, well, look, our housing need is so great that if you're in a lower band, realistically, you're not unlikely to get housed, and it's a lot of work for officers to assess your case when you're in a lower band and to maintain your case on the register, and therefore we're only going to allow people onto the register who have a recognised housing need. As I say, 50% of the councils adopt that rule, 50% of councils in England don't adopt that rule, and there's no hard and fast rule to say Conservative councils adopt it or Labour councils adopt it and the opposite. It really is not really a political issue whether to have an open register or not. And obviously you have big housing pressures in Chorley from the homeless, and you also have housing pressures for people who are not homeless but have an urgent housing need. And would you want to go to a policy which said we only allow people with a housing need to join the register? That's another one to think through. The number of bands you've got is another area where you could make some changes. So it is a 5-band scheme, and that's unusual. Most councils operate on a 3-band scheme, some operate on a 4-band scheme, some operate on a 2-band scheme. And that's a question then, do you want to reduce the number of bands from 5 to 3? And the justification for doing that is 5 bands is quite confusing. So, you know, people are not quite sure what's going on if they got band D or band E. Well, there's a simpler 1, 2, 3 ABC banding system, and then date order in those bands might be a simpler system to think about, and that's certainly something that officers are suggesting that members might want to consider. Another possible change, and as I say, I'll come back to these changes one by one for some discussion, but another possible change is the number of offers that people can have before there's a penalty. So currently, you have a free offer policy. So after 3 offers, people are removed from the register for 12 months. But with a free offer policy, what that does, I suppose, some people decide to window shop a bit, and when they're bidding for properties, they're not necessarily committed to the properties they're bidding for. And that means the social housing properties stay empty longer because people refuse them more. And, you know, the argument is that most councils don't operate a free offer policy. Most councils have brought that down to 2 offers. And that's something, again, that members might want to actually consider. The other couple of things, there is something called global banding, which quite frankly is incredibly confusing. Doesn't really work, or it operates, and actually I think the whole of the Select Move steering group are quite happy to see the back of. So one of the things is to remove this global banding scheme. I think it would take me the rest of the night to try and explain it. And the other final big issue is you have quotas by band, and that's unusual. So you get X% of properties that are available to band A, X% to B, X% to C, X% to D. You don't have a quota for band E. But what you're doing, in a sense, by giving certain percentages to each band, is you're housing a lot of people in lower housing need, which means people in higher housing need miss out. And it's unusual to do it that way. Most councils, especially when their homelessness pressures are increasing, say no, it should be band and date order. So if we do a short list based on how high a band you've got and the date order within band. So, you know, it's not a quota by bands, it's a short list by the order of bands. So basically, if 5 people bid from band A, then the short list would consist of band A. Whereas currently you have this position that each band has a set quota. And there's a higher quota for the higher bands, admittedly, but each band has a set quota. And the argument is, do you want to continue to see quotas per band, or do you want something that recognises the increased housing pressures, homelessness pressures and temporary accommodation pressures, surely maybe under, where you do away with quotas and then just have it based on the higher the band. That's what creates the shortlist and date order within band. So those are the main issues. I know members may have many other concerns on Select Move. I read the update to this to the Scrutiny Committee around some member recommendations from around 2016, where there were concerns that there weren't pictures, you know, the quality of pictures or stock pictures on the advertisements, and there were a number of other concerns that members have got, and they may be individual issues, and Rachel certainly here that could comment on any of those issues, but they're less to do with the policy and more to do with the practice. What I've set out to you are the potential changes on the policy. So what I would propose to do is to go back to each of those and start with the local connection ones, which is, you know, the one to move from 6 months local connection with Chorley to 2 years, and really open that up for any thoughts that members may have on whether they think that's a good thing or the bad thing or indifferent thing to what they might want to see within the new policy. So I'll pause there to give members a chance to come back on that one.
Okay, thanks for that. Comments, any members, anything that they want to ask about local connections? Councillor Snake, Kim.
Yeah, you've spoken, in terms of the local connection stuff that you started on, you've spoken quite a bit about the length of time. But I've briefly read the current policy today, I'll skim read it. But it seems to me, from like the casework and stuff that we get, the issue doesn't necessarily seem to be the length of time that people are eligible to then register for Select Move. It seems more about, because I mean, there's different, I mean, I know you've been employed to sort of update the policy, but it seems to be more about when I register for Select Move and I want a property in Chorley, do I have to have a specific connection to that specific local authority of Chorley, or do I have a specific connection to one of those 3 Select Move local authorities? That seems to be the biggest issue for me. And at the moment, it's quite open-ended, or it seems to be. I mean, I know there's different views on it, but to me, that seems to be the bigger issue, rather than, and that's only, and people have other opinions, rather than whether it's 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, or what, really. That's probably my thoughts. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll just come back on that specifically. So certainly some councils would be in a position where they would say the connection, 2 years, 6 months, whatever you decide, has to be to the specific council. And as far as I understand the policy, the 6 months in 12 has to be to the Select Move area. And that is unusual. Normally the connection would need to be to the local authority itself. However, having said that, your shortlisting is based on the local connection to the area. So even though I could I could join the register through having a local connection for residents to the Select Move area, when it comes to shortlisting, then I will need to have a local connection to the Chorley area. So that's what comes first in any shortlist, as it should be, obviously. Rachel, you want to come in? Do you want to come in to clarify anything on that?
I have a couple of other councillors who want to come in too.
Yeah, of course. I just wanted to clarify at that point, though, it is a local connection to Chorley. It muddies the waters with the global banding issue, Andy, but when the applications are assessed, we would put on there if there's been a local connection to Chorley verified. So we do filter them at that stage. I think potentially some of the issues that come up through the wards are around the exemptions to local connection criteria rather than the length of time.
Okay, I've got Sarah here, Councillor Ainsworth and Councillor Khan online. So, Sarah.
Thanks, Chair. It's just a quick question on the banding. There's one that says medical mobility cases and medical grounds, which is a band B. Just looking at the criteria for that, I will class that as a band A, really, because I will class that as a priority, really. Is there any way we could possibly look at changing that round, maybe?
Yeah, one of the things I'm going to do or suggest with the policy is it being much clearer how you get that medical priority, what qualifies for the top banding for medical, what qualifies for the next banding down for medical, because I think it isn't clear, and I think it's open to interpretation when you read what's in the policy, where someone might say, well, actually, I think that should be an A, or actually the other way around in some cases. So I would say in the policy, it's not clear enough for the members of the public, for the service users who are registered, as how you get a band A for medical and how you get the lower banding on medical. And I think that does need to be clarified and tightened up. So that's one of the things that I will be bringing forward with some examples as part of the policy review.
Sarah, you want to come back? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, it's just another follow-up on the banding. It's the overcrowded section, which is on band B. Would that include, say like you've got somebody living on their own and they've got 3 children, and if the children are sharing a room and they need to move because they're getting older, does that fit in that criteria?
There's a measurement. Rachel might have a better idea than me, but there's a measurement of overcrowding that's in the policy. So the way it's assessed is by the measurement, and that's normally for most councils covers something called the bedroom standard, where you're looking at the ages of the children, you're looking at the sexes of the children, and you're looking at the number of people or children in each room. And it's that measurement, which sounds quite complicated, but is reasonably straightforward. It's that measurement that you use to then determine the different priorities for the different levels of overcrowding. Rachel, do you want to just come in on that?
Yeah, so there's a slight difference between the statutory overcrowding banding and the ones for overcrowding requiring additional bedrooms. That example that you just gave, Councillor Ainsworth, is that one. So say you've got a family with children who obviously once one of the children turns 16, they'd get their own bedroom, or children of different sexes over the age of 10. If those circumstances change within the household, they can then be over-occupying a property by a certain amount of bedrooms, and that's what covers those in the policy.
Councillor Khan, you wanted to come in, Hasina.
Thanks, Chair. I echo everything that Sarah and Kim have said in terms of the questions, so they've been answered. However, I would just like to know that how is refreshing or changing this policy is going to make it fairer with the allocation to those who have been on the housing register for, God knows, I know a family who've been there for 10 years and they've not moved, and they're on a higher band.
Yeah, the policy is based on housing need. Obviously, people are, I mean, it's back to the point I made at the beginning, in that the public perception of the policies, allocations policies, is it's a waiting list where you join and you wait and you queue, and it's a fair system where nobody goes ahead of you and you wait your turn. And I think that's a very good example that you've just given about somebody who's been on the register for 10 years waiting and getting nowhere. The problem is it's not a waiting list. It's in law set by the government. It's a register of housing need. And that means if I have a low band, I might be on the register for 5 or 10 years getting nowhere, compared to somebody that joins the register possibly relatively relatively recently, that has a higher housing need. Obviously, you do have quotas, but the quotas then, for the different bands, the percentage of the quotas go down as you go down the banding themselves. So I see why the public perceive it as not being fair. Obviously, you could give more priority again for people who have a local connection with Chorley. That's one of the options that you could consider. Rachel just wants to come in, so I'll just let Rachel come in.
Before Rachel, is that okay? Have you anything else further to ask Hasina?
Hi, June. Yeah, just a quick question, please. A further one. 1 second. I can't find the piece of paper. Can I come back, June, when I find it?
That's okay. Rachel?
Yeah, I think it was just to add on top of that, an extra layer is we have a lot of families in higher bands who are waiting on larger properties as well. So larger family properties that don't come through the system as often, people can be waiting a long time for that, not necessarily because there's an issue with the system itself. It's still fundamentally a lack of larger properties sometimes to meet demand.
Okay, thanks, Rachel.
Can I just come back in?
Yeah, Hasina, have you found it now? Yeah, no? Okay.
Can you hear me, June?
Yeah.
June, can you hear me?
Yes. We can. Don't you just love technology? Hey there, Hasina. Oh. What happened then?
We can hear you.
Could the question be put in the chat, maybe?
Yeah. I don't know if she can hear us.
Shall I plough on, Chair?
Yeah, if you carry on and we'll try and get Asina back, yeah. I was just going to suggest.
So it's whether there's any other comments on the other local connection rule, and the main one of those was close family in the Chorley area. So if we're at present, you can qualify if you have close family in the Chorley area that lived in the area for a number of years. But in that context, I suppose, it is that balance that you have to have or to think about, that means that people who aren't living in Chorley at the moment and have no reason to give or receive essential support from family can qualify for the register, whereas they might be living in Manchester or Liverpool or somewhere else. And whether that is an area that members might tentatively want to consider proposals on tightening up.
Kim?
Is close family at the moment, is it defined as what close family is? Because close family is open to all sorts of understandings, isn't it? Yeah.
It is defined. If I just find it, or Rachel might want to come in with it, but I find it, here it is. So close family, parents, adult kids or children who permanently reside in the area of Chorley, Preston and South Ribble, and have done so continuously for at least 5 years. So that's the definition in the current family policy of close family.
Yeah, I mean, again, everybody might have different opinions, but I was going to envisage that you were going to say sort of extended family and everything. No, I think that's quite tight-knit, to be honest. Yeah, thank you.
And just to say, we do ask for evidence of that as well.
Can you hear us yet, Asina?
We've got the question on the chat.
Oh, we've got the question.
Councillor Khan has just put the question in. It might be one for Rachel to pick up. Councillor Khan says, just wanted to ask, how are properties allocated? Is it a computer that decides or real people?
The shortlist is drawn up by the system itself, but it is then manually checked by the housing officer. So there are always not so much exemptions, but the way that the policy is applied is that when the shortlist is drawn at the end of the cycle, the advertising cycle, the person in the position one, if you like, might not always be the person who is offered the property, but that may be because they don't meet the criteria for that property, even though they've been allowed to bid on it, which is another thing that does confuse customers. An example of that would be where customers may have a 2-bed need and they've been allowed by the landlords who open up their adverts for 3-bed properties and allow everybody to bid on them. So somebody could be in a higher band and have been in that band for longer, but if they haven't got a 3-bed need, they may be skipped on the shortlist, and the landlord would be looking for the household that would fill that property most appropriately and not have under occupation.
Anybody else, any more questions on the local connection? If not, Andy can move on.
So the next one really, is quite a fundamental question. Should you just register households who have a house in need and in effect have a chance of being housed? Or should you allow the register to be completely open, where people can join the register regardless of whether they have any chance of being housed? And I think the why this is an issue is just each application, that 2,189 is not a static group. So each month, obviously scores of people apply to join the register and people come off the register, and officers are stretched having to assess every single person that makes an application. And even if you have no housing need and no chance or little chance of being housed, you still have to get the same checks and verifications. And of course, in Select Move, there is an alternative system, the OPR system, where hard to let properties that can't be let, people can actually express their interest in hard-to-let properties anyway. So it's not as if people with no housing need don't have a chance of obtaining social housing through another means. So it's that fundamental question, and 50% of councils have made the decision that given their limited housing resources, social housing resources, they're going to restrict the housing register only to those with a housing need, and only really to those with a housing need with a chance of being housed. And that would be quite a big change if that's something that Chorley and the other councils and the housing associations wanted to do. But I put it out there really, and as I say, it's not a political issue. So there's many Conservative or Labour councils who limit those who have done away with an open register. So there's no sort of certain political parties do one way and not another. But it really does mean it would save on administration, and it would mean that the officers have more time to give more of a personalised service to those that are in the higher band. So I'll just throw that open for any comments. These are just early ideas coming through from the steering group.
Councillors, what do you think? What are your views on that? Come on. Kim?
I'm going to be controversial. I think we should have an open housing register. I think anybody should be entitled, whether or not to register, whether or not they've got a chance of getting it or not, to be honest. Thanks.
Sarah?
I agree with Councillor Snape. I think it's fair.
To be fair, I agree as well. I think we should be seen to be open and fair, and we're being selective before we start off, really, aren't we? So there you go. Councillor Khan, do you want any to comment? Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. The reason for it is obviously there's a trade-off. If it's an open register, it takes more time to assess. That's more time and cost. And some councils say that's the way we want to go, and other councils say we want to stick to an open register. And that's, an entirely legitimate position to actually take.
Sarah, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, I think it would just be a very controversial move if we started discriminating people from the register. I don't think residents would appreciate it either.
I think there are going to be better ways of saving money than doing something like this that I think is could be very divisive and cause a real lot of upset in areas that people couldn't get on the select movement. I could foresee all kinds of issues.
That's good feedback, Chair. Thank you. Can I move on to then the banding position? So obviously there's a 5-band system. It's interesting that you are doing a customer survey at the moment, and it'll be interesting to see what comes back from that. All I can give you is examples of previous customer surveys done by other councils, where having a 5-band system, as seen by some service users, as being quite complicated. And it would be possible to reduce that to a 3-band system. It's not particularly controversial. Nobody loses out. So there would be a question of either 3 or 4 bands scheme. So it's just reducing the number of the bands for simplicity purposes, so that it is easier to understand why people have been granted a band and their position then within that band itself. So as I say, most councils have a 3 or 4 band system. So it's not particularly controversial, but it's still quite a big change from where we are now.
Comments from anyone? Kim, then Sarah. Go on, Sarah, go first.
I think I actually agree with a 3-band system, because I'm looking at some of these now, and I do think some of these that are in Band B and Band C should be prioritised. They should be in the top tier.
Kim?
Yeah, I do agree with, I think it would make the system more simple to the public as well. I do have a question on a related banding issue. Can I ask that at the same time?
Yeah, by the way.
I've had a I've had some issues raised with it about individuals where people, you know, where families split up, and you know, when the partner moves out, but one of the, you know, the main you know, like the mother, obviously in most cases ends up with the children, that people have then gone on to different properties, but then their select move application and their banding has been lowered, so that applicant, to me, that applicant's that applicant's application should be based on the predicament that applicant finds themselves in, and they shouldn't be disadvantaged by the status of their former partner. I mean, obviously we're in the 21st century and people split up all the time. I just wonder whether or not there's anything that could be incorporated into our banding policy about the fact that when families, you know, two-parent households do split up, that it doesn't go against the individual in terms of the banding when they go on to the next property. Because I have had that raised a couple of times recently, and it wasn't an issue I was aware of until recently, to be honest.
I'll let Rachel come in first. She may have some comments on that.
To be honest, I think I probably need to know the context more, and it might be for outside of this meeting to discuss what the circumstances were, because any applicant on the register should be assessed in line with their current circumstances. So there shouldn't be anything that is held onto as a legacy from former household details. So I think I'd need a bit more context around the question, really.
Okay, yeah. I think if it reduces the number of bands, makes the system simpler, we should do it, because that's one of the biggest bugbears we have. Is it's really complicated, and I don't know why you know. So anything that makes it simpler, easier to understand for both us and the applicants has got to be better. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. That's very helpful.
Yeah. Kim?
Sorry, just another one about banding. Again, it's not specific to anything, but were not necessarily the council, but other partners. I mean, we have a lot of people in Chorley who are kind of, to put it bluntly, are sitting on their hands waiting for houses to come up in certain parts of the borough. So they're not necessarily bidding very frequently. And I know I've raised some of these cases with Rachel, but where partners of the select move process have basically reduced their banding without telling them. Is there anything that this process could do to stop that from happening or to tighten that up? Because I know they've told the council, oh, well, we won't do that, there are processes in place, but that has happened, because we do have quite a few people that join Select Move, need a house, but you know, they might want to remain in Adlington or Coppell, or they don't want to be sent to Preston or the other side of Leyland, if you see where I'm coming from. So they're quite, you know, insistent on waiting until something comes up in their locality, but we don't want them to be penalised for not bidding regularly, because then their banding is getting reduced by, not necessarily by the council, but by some of these Select Move partners.
Can I answer that one? I think it's just like, it's not necessarily something to be resolved within the policy, but it is something to be resolved within the procedural issues, and that'll come into the role of the Select Move coordinator. So anything like that, if it could be channeled through the Select Move coordinator, we can pick it up as an operational issue.
Any more questions from anybody? No? Oh.
I'll just move on then, Chair. So this issue at the current policy where people can refuse free reasonable offers before they are removed from the register for 12 months. And the norm for most councils is refusing 2 offers. So it's not saying the first one comes along you have to take. But if it's a free offer policy, then the problem is, and I think there's some evidence for this, that what happens is that people do window shop a bit. They're not necessarily committed to the property they're bidding for because they know they have several offers left. And that creates potentially problems that properties, much needed social housing properties stand empty longer than they should because the number of refusals. And it also creates frustration with the housing associations I've certainly done some work in the northeast and Teesside, where because of the problems of refusals, some housing associations have pulled out of the equivalent of select move in places like Middlesbrough and Teesside, because they just say, well, look, our properties are taking too long to let, and we're not gonna have it anymore. So one of the proposals is to go from a free, the penalty is at refusing free reasonable offers, and bringing that down to 2. And I know Rachel's got a hand up.
Okay, yeah, Rachel, yeah.
Sorry, Chair.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify, when we talk about reasonable offers in select move, this is a separate issue to a reasonable offer discharge a homelessness duty with a offer of social housing, because I know that's been queried in the past. That's a separate thing. We would make one offer discharge our statutory homelessness duty. This is a more general point.
Yeah, you discharge your statutory homeless duty with one offer. That's the norm. And then obviously, if they refuse that offer, they would lose their priority for being homeless. But they'd still be owed another offer, a second offer under the policy. But it wouldn't be an offer that's made with the priority for being homeless, and that's pretty standard in all councils, really.
Okay, thanks. Kim, you wanted to come in again.
Yeah, I think we should remain at the 3 offer policy. Just coming back to the example I muted before, I mean, and there are several of them, we do have a lot of people that, or residents that kind of at times do feel pressured to bid, because otherwise their banding may then be, whether it's an operational issue or not, may then be reduced by the housing partner. I also don't think it would then turn into an issue where housing partners would then struggle to let their properties. I mean, if I think back on the last few pieces of casework I've raised with Rachel and her colleagues over the last 12 months, I've always been told things like 70 odd people have bid for a house, 135 people have bid for a house, 80 odd people have bid for a house. So I really don't think that it would turn into an issue where they couldn't let the properties in Chorley, because we are a high demand place for people to live. So thanks.
Okay, any other? Sarah?
Yeah, I agree with Kim. I think we keep it at 3. I just want this clarification on something on the policy. 6.5 offers of accommodation. It says, if an applicant does not reply to an offer within 2 working days or 24 hours if the property is ready to let, the offer will be deemed to be withdrawn. Is there no way of expanding that maybe to a bit longer than 2 working days?
I think the problem you've got is getting the housing associations to agree to something like that. So the problem for the housing associations, so I don't disagree that you can't let properties in Chorley. I don't think that's the issue. It's the time it takes to let properties if there's a high refusal rate. I think that's the issue. So on the issue of 2 working days in the current policy, I think you'd have a real problem with the housing associations looking to extend that, because obviously it's their rent loss because you don't own the stock. So it's their rent loss around, extra time. And I get the argument, well, what's the difference between 2 days or 3 days or 4 days? But it's really an argument where, in a sense, the council don't have the power because the council don't own the stock. I mean, if the council owned the housing stock and wanted to give people a week to consider whether to accept a property, then that would have an impact on the rent and the voids and the length of time it's empty, but would be in the council's control. But that's not in the council's control in a sense because you don't own the stock. So housing associations, I think, would be significantly concerned if that 2 days was extended any further. I don't know, Rachel, whether there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, I agree. We can raise it. We can put it forward as an option, and we can see what they say. But we haven't got any leverage over that, unfortunately.
Okay. Any more questions from anybody? Any more comments? Councillor Snape?
Sorry, it's on a different point that's not really been covered. It was more about the financial, I don't know if you can touch on it, but about the financial eligibility to join Select Move. I do, and I think I did raise it at the time as well when it was brought in last time or the time before. I do have some concerns about this policy over people having regarding savings of over £30,000. I think particularly in regard to older people's accommodation or older people's needs, that their housing needs should be based on the physical need for housing, not the financial attributes. And I just wondered whether or not anybody's had any discussions around reviewing that or looking at that. Thanks.
So what I would say on that, you have it's an existing policy, and obviously that existing policy has two main elements to it. It's the amount of savings and assets greater than £30,000, and it's the household's gross annual income, including benefit income, of £60,000 or more. So those are the two financial circumstances qualification rules. What I would say is that 30,000 figure is quite high in my experience. So I work with a lot of councils across the country, across England, both in the south and the north. And I would normally see that figure set around 16,000. So in a way, it is a higher, more generous savings figure than Chorley than it is elsewhere. Obviously, DWP for benefits have certain levels. I'm not a benefit expert, but they have a similar figure, I think around 16,000, but I stand to be corrected on that. So the 30,000 figure and savings before, you can have up to 30,000 before you're disqualified. Having said that, it's open for discussion and debate across the partnership itself. And some councils may have exemptions. So obviously there are exemptions for things like, people that have got savings or have got a lump sum of money from, say, being injured in the armed forces. That would certainly be an exemption. But if councillors wanted officers to consider exemptions on the 30,000 figure for, say, elderly people, older people, then that's something that certainly could be put forward to the partnership. Rachel, do you want to come in?
Is that okay, Chair?
Fine, yeah.
Yeah, it was just to say there is already an exemption, certainly in terms of homeowners who are excluded at the moment, and that is based on physical needs, not the financial circumstances. Although the threshold is still quite high because we have to be able to evidence that only a social housing property could meet that need that couldn't be met on the open market or the private rented sector. So that is already in the policy currently and would likely be staying in the policy.
Yeah, I still think I agree with the sentiments. I don't know the chap's name. I think it needs reducing. I know I have had a couple of cases over the last few years since this policy came in, and I think eventually it was such a laborious process for these elderly people to get to this, and eventually they got there, but it just shouldn't be such a long-winded thing to evidence everything, and and eventually they got the ground floor flat that they needed, and the grief and and the blood, sweat and tears that they went through, it was just ridiculous, and you won't want that for your grandparents or my grandparents. Whether or not it can be beefed up in some way around making it simpler for older people, but yeah, I do think that financial threshold needs to come down. Thanks.
Okay. Any more comments? Any more? No. Andy, have you any?
Just the final one, Chair, which is, I think, quite an important one. And so your current policy is that you allocate quotas to bands A to D. Rachel will correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I don't think there are quotas in band E. And it's not the same quota, so it's not a flat that, the 4 bands get 25% each. It's not that. It still reflects housing need, but it is a quota system. So basically you give each of the bands a bit of a look in as far as a chance of getting some housing. Now that's all very laudable, and I think, you know, in principle you can understand why you do it. The issue that you've got to set that against is the housing pressures have changed in Chorley, and you have not just the homeless, but especially the homeless, potential financial implications for the Council of Temporary Accommodation, and others in high housing need. And obviously the fundamental position is if you give properties to lower, if you have a quota for lower housing need bands, it means the people in the higher housing need bands that have a greater housing need aren't getting housed in the numbers they would have gotten housed if you didn't have quotas. So obviously people in the higher housing need potentially, even though they will get more of the housing, then not enough of those cases will be housed because you're allocating quotas to lower housing need bands. So it's a fairly, you know, important issue really about which way to go. Context is quotas are fairly unusual, but having said that unusual, there are councils that have quotas. So it's not as if only you're the only council amongst 2 or 3 in the country that have quotas. But I wouldn't have thought more than 5% of councils operate a quota system. Most it's band and date order. So you advertise the property, people then bid, and then the short list is in descending order, starting with the highest band, and of course local connection as well to Chorley. But the short list starts with the higher band. So that's the last really big issue that these early stages of the steering group looking at different ideas, that it would be useful just to get some thoughts from Scrutiny on.
Okay, Kim?
Sorry, just getting it straight in my head. So you've suggested getting rid of the quotas to then go along, or the possibility of then going along more the line of doing it in date order. See, from my recollection...
Band and date order.
Banding and date order. Because my issue, when we've had the discussions about the quotas and stuff over the last 12, 18 months, it's been about increasing the quotas to get more properties on select move, rather than issues about people with different levels of housing need being housed or not being housed.
I think
I've just got to say,
that might be to do with nominations. Rachel might be able to clarify that.
Would that process then? So would that mean that 100? So if they went down the line of allocating properties in date and banding order, would that then mean that 100% of properties went on select move? Thanks.
Rachel, you want to come back on that?
Yeah, just to say, when we're talking about quotas in this context, it's the 75% of all true voids that are advertised or meant to be advertised via select move, that wouldn't change, and the indication from the landlords is that they wouldn't want to increase to any more than 75%, although we have asked. But within the number of properties advertised each year, there is also a quota, so they are prioritised for 40% band A, 30% band B, 20% band C, 10% band D. That should get us to 100. So even within the current policy and the banding with people's priority need, properties have been advertised. So you could potentially have a property, a 3-bed family house that's advertised with priority for those in band C. Now, we know that there are people in band A in need of a 3-bed house, and the idea is that it gives the landlords a mix of tenure, but there are other ways to do that as well. So it's not going to increase the number of properties coming through select move, but what we would hope that it does is give a clearer, more transparent offer of people to the people most in need. It's the allocation of that resource to the people most in need.
Yeah, and just to follow up from Rachel there, so you could have someone who's in band A that says, well, why, I've got the highest band, why wasn't I allowed to bid for that property? And the reason they weren't allowed to bid for that property was it was in the 20% quota for band C, when Band C have 2 bands less worth of housing need than Band A. And that's quite an important issue. Rachel?
Kim?
No, I've got it straight in my head now, yeah, thank you. I think you're right, yeah. Because, that's probably the bulk of what Rachel gets from councillors, with people saying such a body's not got a house. And, you know, in terms of level of transparency in the process and stuff, yeah, thank you.
Okay, Rachel.
Thank you. It was just to say people in Band A would be allowed to bid on it, even if it's prioritised for Band C. But that's, you know, when we spoke before about how the shortlist is drawn at the end. So when the computer system pulls the shortlist at the end, it would put the people in Band C above the people in Band A if the property had been in the Band C quota. It was just to explain that you would still be allowed to bid on it, but you wouldn't be prioritised for it in the current system.
And realistically, you wouldn't have any chance of getting the property.
Go. Andy.
So that's all from me, Chair, on the main issues. Members may have some other issues from Select Move that they want the steering group to consider, or any questions to Rachel, but that's the big issues, shall we say, that are coming through around the sort of the steering group ideas for reviewing the policy.
Okay, thanks. Anything else members want to ask about this? No? No, that's okay. So that's fine, Andy, and thanks for joining us. And if you want to go and have your tea now, please feel free.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry you can't see me, Chair. That's, technology.
Well, it's good when it works.
When it normally does work, but
True.
It wasn't working too well tonight. But thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Anyway,
bye-bye.
It's been very useful to us, I think.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Oh, bye. Right. I think there are some recommendations that we can put forward in a task group that have come out of that conversation tonight, that we can go to the housing allocations review, most definitely. I'm sure Matthew's got a note of those. I mean, definitely about the banding, to make it simpler. Anything that makes life simpler has got to be improved. What else have I got? I've got that many notes on bits of paper. But yeah, I mean, well, over to you. What do you think? Basically.
I know it wasn't in his suggested recommendations, but I do think the financial eligibility needs putting forward, even if it's not for a specific figure, that it needs reviewing and tightening up around. I mean, I know Rachel said it was in there, but as I say from experience, that it's a very, very long, drawn-out process in terms of building up that evidence. I do think we should remain as an open register, because I think it's, as you said, I think it's, what do you call it? It's discriminating people before they've even started.
It's very divisive before you've started. Yeah, I could see us getting more complaints than less doing that. You know, so yes, I definitely think that. Yeah.
So I think tightening up on the specific local authority, because I think he said that was quite not common in terms of, because rather than the generality of Chorley, Preston, South Ribble, to say actually to Chorley. I mean, I'm not so bothered about the 6-month thing. I think it's more about the connection to Chorley, to be honest, but thanks.
Sarah?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the banding, to make it a bit more simpler, but I think we could also review what fits where in the banding as well, because I think some of them in the lower banding needs to go into the higher banding.
Asina, can you hear us? No, obviously not. Rachel? Oh.
Yeah, it was just to echo that really, in terms of the stuff that I get the most queries on, obviously, is the stuff like banding, and especially the global banding, which, you know, Andy's an expert in allocations policies, and it baffles him the same way it baffles me, and it certainly baffles our customers. And just to clarify on the local connection, I tried to clarify while Andy was talking, but we do ask for verification of local connection to Chorley. People may have a local connection to more than one area, but that is evidenced at the point of application. It's not just the whole select move area.
Okay. Anything else? Any other comments? If not, then basically, I think it's been very useful tonight, actually, with Andy. And it's a fresh pair of eyes, which is something that's good. You know, so I'm sorry Matt wasn't here. According to this, the date of the next meeting is the I've lost it now. I've turned over. Is it the 17th? 17th of August. Can we? Would anybody have any objections to us starting that meeting at 7? Because I've got a shop mobility at 6 and I can get here for 7. Otherwise, it's changed the date.
What's the plan for the rest of the
So yeah, I was going to say that was my next question. No, you're all right.
So I believe the 17th we will have the results of the survey and the select move coordinator, and then the one after, at the start of September, will be the final report where you look at. And I'm thinking potentially if we can approach the MP for one of his surgeries either before or after, and then if there's any further information, Councillor Lynch, we can either do a Teams call and sort of have an unofficial meeting between now and the 17th. The 17th of August is going to be quite a busy evening with the...
And I think we asked kind of Councillor Lynch and perhaps Lindsay, if they can't come to the meeting because they send us something written, you know, that gives us some ideas of what issues they've got, so we can consider it that way. Because it's to be difficult to get to pin down. Rachel?
It's only a really quick one, just to say my battery may go, so if I disappear without saying goodbye, it's not because I'm being rude.
We'll not take it personally, because I think we're finished anyway now, so that's okay. Thanks for that. So if you disappear, we'll not think, oh, it's broken again. Right. I think that's it, Matthew. I think that's... Unless anybody has anything to add.
I would be interested to hear what the MP says, because I have heard, and you know, when people have had conversations, I think that's a massive one in terms of an overarching view of Chorley.
Of the issues that he's getting, are they the same as ours or different or what? So, okay.
As somebody who responds to the MP inquiries, I think they are very similar.
Yeah, but it would be good to hear. And how many he's getting, because he's got the overview of the borough. I mean, we can only talk about our wards.
Yeah. Again, I do the responses, so he gets plenty.
Oh, I know that. I've worked in the office at the time, in the past. Okay, thanks a lot, Rachel. I'll not say safe journey home to you.
I know, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Okay, thank you.